Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the California Small Farm Conference. My name is Evan Wigg. I'm with Community Alliance with Family Farmers, and we're stoked to have you here on the very first workshop of the week. So we're really excited about today's workshop. It is whole orchard nutrient cycling. So hopefully you guys are all in the right place and excited to learn about compost and providing nutrients for your orchard. So thanks for everybody for being here. Just want to give a big shout out to our sponsors who helped make this event possible, as well as to our incredible speakers that we have today. We have three different experts, in fact, here with us today to lead the workshop. I want to encourage everybody, if you have any questions for the presenters, if you have comments, resources that you would like to share, we encourage you to use the chat function. If you just look down below, you'll see a little chat feature where you can drop in information, links, or questions, and then we'll have time later in the workshop today for you to get those answered by today's presenters. With that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to our wonderful presenters, Marney, Blair, and Emma Wade. Thank you for being here, and enjoy the conference, everybody.
Great. Thank you, Evan. I'll pick it up. Hi, everybody. My name's Emma, and welcome on this Sunday morning. Marney is going to share our presentation, and then I'll start us off.
All right, I'll share my screen here. Is it working?
It's doing it, I think. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Almost there. There we go. Okay. So welcome. We're talking about whole orchard nutrient cycling, and in the back there is one of our cherry orchards. You can go to the next slide. And this is a farmer-led research and education project, which I'll talk more about later. And the next slide, in Linden, California. That's where we are. Next slide. So what are we going to do? I'm going to talk about who we are and this particular funding that we received, because it's special. I don't know if there's other farmers out there, but anybody coming to this event, I think that you should know about this funding opportunity. Then I'll go over the proposal of the project, and then I'm going to turn it over to my partner Franz here, and he's going to go over the research, the design, and implementation of the project. And then Marney, our technical advisor, is going to come in and talk more about the kind of compost and making compost that we were involved in. Good, next slide. So here we are, and my name is Emma Wade, and I live in Linden, California with Franz, and we farm 170 acres of orchards. It's a legacy farm, and we have walnuts and cherries, and we're starting to diversify into other fruits. And to the right is our technical advisor, Marney Blair. You can go to the next slide. So along with this team, we wanted to have a good team, like a lab or somebody who could help on the side of measuring what we were doing. So we partnered with Dr. William Brinton, who has a lab in Maine called Woods End Laboratories. And they're really doing some really interesting things around soil health and have been a leader for a decade or so. So we're really glad that they partnered with us and helped develop this proposal and helping with the lab side of things. And then, so this is funded by a SARE Western Farmer Rancher grant. SARE is Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. It's a USDA funded organization, and there's chapters for different parts of the country. I find this one really special because it is farmer led. A lot of research is not farmer led. It's usually academic led. And so this is up to $25,000, and it's great. It's you got to put some work in, but it allows farmers to have a question and then work with some guidance and try something out. So it's a project of 1 to 3 years in scope, addressing a sustainable agriculture topic. And then just to touch in on, SARE has these really cool threefold guidelines, which they want you to address social, environmental, and economic factors in how you're thinking about sustainable agriculture. All right, we can go to the next slide.
Okay.
Good. So where to begin? So I just want to put a little bit in there for anybody who's also thinking about taking on a project and how do we get to this proposal. And imagine for a moment a farmer and the demanding and multifaceted work that we do producing food and putting it out to the world. And let's just say that grant writing and research is not in the job description. Not necessarily what we want to be doing. So, but yet, what does it mean as a farmer to do research or to take on a grant? And so I just want to share our journey with that and where it brought us in thinking. And one is that, well, it will ultimately relate to what you're interested in and what you're dealing with. So it's really coming out of the direct interests of the farmer, yet we want to address a real world problem. Good. So we came to the big interest being sustainability and quality. And sustainability for us is, we want to be around for the long game, and we're facing some pretty big things, and we want to be more self-sufficient, lower our input costs, and meet regulatory compliances. And then on the quality end, we want to be doing something good. We want to put a good quality product, nutritious product out into the world. And we also want the farm environment to be a good one and our lives to be of good quality. So then going into the nuances, two things that we're facing kind of came to light. And one is orchard waste. And maybe in whatever kind of farming you're doing, there's a parallel situation, but there's always some kind of waste. And for us, it's a lot of it is wood waste. We're pruning, or we're removing trees when they die, or whole orchards when they need to get turned over. And California has a burning ban. They've been phasing out agricultural burning, and it's actually supposed to come to its full elimination of agricultural burning in 2025, which is just around the corner. And being a small farm, it's the most efficient to be able to just burn our prunings. However, we realize it's not favorable for different reasons. So what else could we do with it? The main solution is for sort of the bigger conversation has been reincorporation. And reincorporation means pretty much chipping it up and just putting it back on the land. And we've tried some of this and we were unsatisfied with the result. The wood material doesn't really break down quickly, and it seems to maybe even compromise the nutrition cycle in the soil, because it's like it needs to pull nitrogen and stuff so that it can break down and do its thing. And we want that nutrition to go to the trees and not to this activity of breaking down all this wood material. So we're wondering, is there something better? And then that led us directly to nutrition, and just something that we're dealing with is also regulatory pressures to be more mindful of nitrogen. There's different initiatives that farmers are facing to manage their nitrogen, concerning water contamination, and then separately, fertilizer costs the last couple of years have just skyrocketed and aren't tenable ways to feed the orchards anymore. So we're like, well, let's look at nutrition. And that led us to what could be a solution to these two problems that meet our greater interests. And we came to whole farm nutrient and carbon cycling, or in other words, whole orchard compost. Here we are. You can see a sneak peek of the compost we made under this project. You can go to the next slide, Marnie. So the proposal is to design and implement a compost system, really like a pilot project that nutrient cycles a season's orchard waste for orchards that are somewhat scaled, so at least 20 acres. We were working with waste from about 40 acres. So in doing so, we're addressing waste management and soil health. And the orchard waste we used included this chipped wood from pruning and removal. And then we also realized, well, we need something more than wood to make compost. And we have something. We have our cover crop that is kind of a whole nother area of what's the best practice of cover crop. And one of the main things is that we just cut it, right? It gets cut and it gets laid on the ground. You hope that what is left under the ground is doing good things, but what's left on top does something, but it really kind of just, you lose a lot of it. So the question was, that's green material that we could add to this wood mass. Can we get it up out of the field and integrate it with the wood chips and make compost? And then we asked Marney if that was possible, and she was like, yeah, it is. So there we go. Our aim to the research is to research alternatives to the orchard waste management to meet the burn ban, and in doing so, develop alternatives to nutrition management that minimize off-farm inputs that are both expensive and make us dependent on outside chemical companies, etc., and to enlarge the intrinsic nutrient and carbon base within the stable farm system. So we want to make the quality of the place better. Good. So now I'm going to turn it over to Franz, and he's going to talk about what we did.
Thank you. Yeah, so that was a whirlwind into the ideas that built themselves up to imagine this whole project. And once we got excited about the idea of it, now came the task of, well, how does that actually happen here on the ground? You know, how does this, prunings from the orchard, where does it go? How do you handle it? When does it become chip? How do you store it? Where are you going to put this compost? How long does it take? How much energy is it really going to require to deal with all this material, et cetera, et cetera? So I'll try to just walk through a little bit of what that looked like for us. And every situation is, of course, going to be different and particular to your operation. But I'm sure there's going to be, the hope is that there's enough similarity for you to gain from if you're interested in this sort of thing. So, for orchards, walnuts and cherries, there's a certain amount of pruning you do every year, at the very least, trying to remove dead wood and things like that, but also managing the growth, opening up the tree a little bit for some light and air. And then, inevitably there's always a few trees, hopefully not too many, that just die on their own anyway. So all of this material, as Emma mentioned earlier, traditionally is gathered up into rows and pushed out with a tractor with a brush rake, sort of front end or back end. Back in the day, that's what we used to do. And is burned in large piles, and is very efficient. And I think to a certain degree. Some of that is also fine in general. But we have now a lot more agriculture and a lot more orchards in the state to where that's starting to become excessive. So pushing back on that and creating a limitation on burning is probably a good idea. So hence the evolution of what to do with this. So we still gathered it up in rows, and we pushed it out in piles, and we found an area sort of between orchards where I had just a little extra space so that I could store this material, you know, in the meantime. And you can see on the picture there, there's it's not, yeah, it's piles of the material there just waiting. So we did that throughout the whole year. And then we picked a time, I believe it was in March or something like that, and had a small tub grinder come in and pick up the whole pile little by little and grind it. So that's sort of one direction, one part of the puzzle so far. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but since we have this nice picture of our cover crop to the right, I'll just mention that this is a farming practice we do every year in planting cover crop seed through the winter, or well, in the fall, and it grows through the winter. And then we terminate it in the spring after it has grown to maturity and given its beautiful flowers. And there's so much to be spoken of cover crop itself. But for our purposes, we used it as the sort of nitrogen component in our compost, our cycling idea, right? This particular field was a sort of mix of brassicas and peas and vetch and triticale. Yeah, there's many different cover crops, but that's the one we've been using. So maybe I'll just leave that for now, and then we'll come back to the grinding. Here's our little tub grinder we used, and it's mulching up all the chip. And it's important to use your stock for your compost that is not too large. And so the chip that you would most ideally use is fairly fine. I'm not going to give an exact number. Maybe Marney can talk about that later. But that was a reason we went with this tub grinder as opposed to other chipping methods that we looked at, because it made a really nice mulch to begin with. And that's really helpful for the whole composting process. Maybe we could see what's next.
And some video if you want.
Yeah, it's a video.
Marney, if you click again, it should play.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so here we're just getting a more close-up sense of the size and the amount of chip. And there's the loader in the background going to put it into a pile. So now we have this compost, and we we had so much rain that it really pushed the project later than we wanted. So this cover crop grew quite substantially. Probably went a little further than you would ideally go before you terminate it. But here we are mowing it down. So the other main sort of problem to solve or creative solution to find is what's the best way to gather up this material. I think traditionally around here, farmers just normally mow it down and let it kind of decompose on top of the ground, and most of it just kind of dries out and becomes more of a carbon base, and most of its nutrients are kind of lost in that process. So, you know, our big thought was to, well, how can we gather it up, right? Not just mow it down and let it sit on top. There were a lot of ideas about that. One was to maybe rent or buy some sort of baling machine and bale it up and haul it out of the field that way. But what I had decided on was to knock it down and leave it fairly large, I guess. I don't know how to say that, but not mulch it too much, so that I could go through with a orchard rake, which is a spinning implement that basically like a wheat rake or grass rake, could windrow it a little bit. And then I used a front load brush rake tractor, just drove down the row with it low to the ground and just scooped up as much as I could. And I found it was, pretty effective. 90% of it at least, was able to be gathered up. I think this is another video.
Sorry, Franz, just let me know when you want it to advance. I feel like I'm not keeping up with your presentation, so.
Sure. Yeah, I think you've been doing good, but we can enjoy this video live action shot of
Yeah,
our good friend Juan mowing down this particular section. Yeah.
You say why you chose to use that particular mower?
Yeah, a rotary mower can deal with a lot of material better than a flail mower. And our flail mowers would just be overwhelmed with that much material all at once, and so as well. So we went with that. And like I said, I wanted to hold it in a larger chunks and not just totally shred it at this point. But it is definitely cutting it at the base, and so it is free. It's not just rolling over it and pushing it down as well. So here's Marney and I looking at our material and having something intelligent to say, I hope. I want to go to the next one.
Recipe.
Yeah. So here we're forming our initial windrow, and we're putting down a bucket full of mulch, and then I believe the next one will be.
oh, next slide.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So there you can see gathered up the cover crop onto the brush rake, and then we'd use a scoop of that. And probably we were in that previous slide talking about what's the right ratio and what's going to be our recipe for this compost. And I think we started out with the idea of a third cover crop to 2/3 wood chip. But because the cover crop was more mature, maybe than ideal, we decided, and we had a lot of it. We pretty much went half and half, I believe, in the end. And so then I'd put there's a scoop of the wood chips on the ground, and then we put a scoop of the cover crop and moved on down the line. Next. Well,
Is this a video?
Yeah, there is. I think if you click the right of, there you go.
Yeah. So this is us watering the pile, and just to say that before it got to this spot, I have a compost turner, and so the original recipe was turned, I think, a couple times to really mix the wood chip and the cover crop together. And this is kind of what we ended up with. I think this video is probably a few weeks after that. So the grass is dried up on the top there. And so then you have to, in this warm summer climate in California, you do definitely need to water your pile and keep it moist enough to have the microbial activity and all the forces going into decomposition sort of have the glue or the medium to work, and that's water. So what we did is we used a 1,000-gallon bubble tank on a trailer behind the truck,
Go to the next slide.
and just used a
Next
hose,
slide.
watered it down. Yeah. So there's the trailer, and this picture is actually is our other site where we've been doing other compost, and it's behind the turner there. But this other site where we did this project, I didn't have time to maneuver all of those, or I didn't have space to maneuver all those implements, and so I had to do them separately, the watering and the turning. But that's a picture of the setup there that we used. Next slide. So here's our compost pile. It's been watered, it's been turned, and now it's doing its magic. And you can see it's steaming nicely at the top. And yeah, we had beautiful temperatures. Again, I'll let Marney speak more to that, but we monitored it every day for about a month or month and a half. And then I think we started going to every other day or so. And yeah, if we see the next slide, you can see we used a thermometer and a moisture meter there. And so we would go down the pile and do maybe 6 or 7 readings because it was a good 700 feet long. It's quite substantial. For our
Was the
needs.
dog part of the recipe, Franz?
Yeah, he he did the warmth test using belly. That was really accurate. You know, you can tell by his expression. Yeah. Yeah. So this is from maybe your material, Marney. This graph.
Yeah, that's something she gave us at the beginning.
Yeah, sort of just showing a predictable, ideal temperature graph for a compost pile. There's an initial sharp increase in temperature, and then it should kind of plateau at a nice high temperature around 140 degrees for, month or two maybe, and then just a slow decline. So if you ever see any really radical movements, then maybe your pile's drying out or getting too hot, maybe it's too wet, or maybe it's good to turn it again. These kinds of questions, or these are some of the remedies for if your temperature is being ecstatic on you. Ecstatic's not the word I was going for, but
Erratic?
erratic. Yeah, thank you. So here's another picture of turning the pile as it's getting more mature. I don't know exactly when it was, but probably like a month in. And so you can see it's steaming beautifully behind us because it's being freshly turned, and you can see all that warmth and activity is very present still. Next. That looks like another picture of that. Probably even further along. I think it's more mature at this point as well.
Franz, this is a great picture of your implement to turn the windrow. Can you just describe that to?
Yeah, so it works off of the power takeoff of the tractor, and it's basically a trailer, and that arm coming off to the side is also on a hydraulic ram, so it can go up and down when you're transporting it. So it can go up in the air, be directly behind you, but when it's down, you're driving next to the pile, not over it or through it in any way. And it turns that shaft going through turns, and it has these flippers on it. And so as you're going through the pile, it's in a way kind of, if you imagine yourself bending over and throwing it over your back as it goes along. And it also sort of does it in such a way that it doesn't just, throw it in any direction, but it kind of throws it towards the middle all the time. So it's always sort of crowning a pile behind itself. And you go very, very slowly. It's doing a lot of work. And so you need a tractor with what's called a creeper gear. And you crawl along like, I don't even know, some sort of fraction of a mile per hour. And it's very effective and does a very nice job of aerating and mixing and turning the pile. Yeah. And sometimes you catch moments of beauty in all of it. And I think that's a nice one. There's, another one. Is this a video, Emma, or no?
I don't know.
No, I guess it's just showing the back side of it as it's going through. So here we are into the phase now where it has done a lot of its own work, and we're going to test where it is in the process. And so I believe here we're going along. We took 5 or 6 samples from the middle of the pile into 5-gallon buckets and prepared some samples to send to Woods End Lab to work their magic. And so I think there's our good dog Rocco saying good job, well done, and let's take a break. So there's the compost after several months of watering and turning and caring, and now we're just letting it go, letting it do its thing. And I guess at this point turning it over to Marney.
Yeah, but maybe Marney, you want to just take a moment and we'll ask Evan if there's any questions that have come up in the chat.
That would be great. And also maybe a time check to see how much time we have left here.
Yeah,
we
sure thing. You've got about let's see, about 40 minutes here. So
Oh, wow.
plenty of
Okay.
time left, and we do have a couple questions.
Great.
One of them is, what's your cover crop mix?
Yeah, I guess I indicated some of that. It's a mix of triticale, a radish,
daikon.
like a daikon radish. There's a little bit of mustard, not a lot. I think like 5% or something like that. And then there's just standard peas and vetch, and maybe some barley. Can't remember.
Triticale's the grain in there.
Yeah, I guess it's just the triticale. And this one, we've done different ones over the year, but that one I think is what that was. Yeah.
It's intended to be a soil builder.
Yeah.
Great. We also had a couple questions about the burning ban that you mentioned. One person, I believe they're under the impression that it's only for the San Joaquin Valley and not the entire state. Are you aware of whether or not that applies to the whole state?
Yeah, I don't believe it is the whole state. And I think county to county has their own exceptions or nuances into that. I mean, the whole state is trying to reduce, right, emissions of all kinds. But San Joaquin County has a high, and other counties do, a high practice of burning from orchards and such. And so there even are nuances within ours. It's not 100%. There's scales of farms and different reasons why you'd be given an exception to that. But as a general rule, just as the average practice goes, they're wanting to ban it.
Yeah, and just to further that, I think the entire state of California through the Air Quality Board is exerting pressures for not just in the farming community, but in all types of industries to clean up our air. So it's imperative that we find other methods to clean our fields.
Another person asks whether or not the burning ban has any impact on controlled burns, and I think I can probably answer that. I think those are regulated separately. There's definitely not a ban on controlled burns. In fact, I think there's more and more interest in controlled burns, and I think that's a whole other category of regulations. Let's see, what are... someone want to know what would happen if you spread the wood chips over the cover crop between the tree rows?
Yeah, I think Marney would be great to elaborate on it, but there's a quality to mounding up your material into sort of a pile, and the decomposition process that goes on in that situation is different than a thinner spread out sort of layer on the top of the soil. And so it's a good idea in general, and it would certainly be a lot easier to do that, but we wouldn't get the same result that we were looking at as far as capturing the nutrients of those two products in the most maximum way, I guess. So I think the short answer is what would happen is, well, they would decompose, but you wouldn't capture the potential of nutrient and life, and et cetera, that you could by actually mounding it into composting piles.
Yeah, and just to add to that, not only you wouldn't capture the quality and probably for your effort, the nutritional quality that you would need on your farm, but also with farming, we always have to consider the time and the economic impact. And so by just spreading wood chips on top of the cover crop, the method is a bit like sheet composting as opposed to windrow composting. What you just saw was an example of windrow composting. And what that does is actually speed up the time at which the decomposition would happen. If you were to do sheet composting, it may take upwards to a year and a half before you would see those elements break down. And in that period of time, you would, in our climates in here in California, it would probably dry out and not complete its decomposition process.
Great. And I think someone else mentioned that if certified organic, their impression is that burning is only allowed for disease control. That was just an extra comment on that topic. But
yeah, that is one
true.
exception.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there are certain diseases that you just need to eradicate the host material and just burn it, and that's really the best and most effective way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. We can certainly come back to more Q&A later.
I wanted to just put one other thing out there before Marney jumps in, and that is where we are now. So the project is not complete, actually. We thought that we might spread the pile in October, but we decided for various reasons around where the pile was in its maturity, and what we needed to do in the fall in terms of walnut harvest, that we would let it sit. And so it is still there. It has cooked down a lot. So basically it's cooked down so much that you kind of flip it over on itself. So now it's half the length, kind of the same size, but half the length. And we're still looking at what it is before we'll spread it, probably in April. And so that's the quality of the compost we're testing. And also there's this whole element of carbon that I didn't really talk about yet, which is we are trying to track in nutrient cycling, you're also capturing the carbon. And Will Brinton is helping us with those numbers, and not ready to present them yet. But there is this other aspect of carbon capture or sequestration that is part of this picture, and that the project isn't finished yet. So there we go.
Well, Emma, actually, that was a great segue into what I want to talk about. And let's just sort of wrap our minds around that just a little bit. And to summate from my perspective as a composting consultant, what you guys did was you were creating this carbon skeleton, if you will, by sequestering the carbon that is in the wood chips and also in the cover crop that you had. And by creating this carbon skeleton, which really is what we call humus and sort of the most essential element of compost, you're then holding on to these nutrients that are in your entire farm, that are in the cover crop or in the limbings of the trees. And it's this beautiful holding of the nutrients instead of burning them and volatilizing them into the atmosphere. So it really beautifully illustrates how the two of you had the courage to try this project, to move forward, and you're going to be rewarded with, I'm sure of it, when the results come back from the laboratory of how you were able to capture these elements that are in your farm, and the numbers will show that. So anyway, I'm just going to give a very, very brief introduction as to who I am. The main gist of my presentation this morning is to hopefully impress upon you to work with someone who is a composting consultant or someone who has had experience composting. It has its own science and art to it. So it's very, it's a little bit like cooking or a little bit like farming. You have to sort of dive in and then have a lot of courage, but also there's a lot of science and experience behind that can guide you into a successful operation. So to just give you a little bit of a brief background, I started my composting journey designing and implementing a large-scale composting facility in a very new national park, which was the Presidio of San Francisco. And I took all the vegetation that was being gathered up because the mission was to create native habitats, native plant habitats. So in this slide, you can see there's some non-native plants. And so those were taken down, grinded up, and with various other elements, I created the medium for the native plant nursery and various things. So if some of you ever get the chance to go visit the Presidio, go down to Chrissy Field and you can see what a composting facility can create. Then I moved up to Grass Valley and had a diversified farm with turkeys, chickens, cows, row crops, orchards, and we also had a large-scale composting that was part of our farm as well. And so what I just wanted to show here was that in the right-hand corner, this is sort of a illustration of the stockpiles for our composting program. And this is the windrows of our composting program, which was sort of like the balance point and the focus point of our farm, really, because it was where all of our fertility for the farm came from. I just want to briefly go over, I'm assuming that the people that have attended this webinar this morning are interested in compost, but there's probably different understanding of what compost can do on a farm scale. And so I'm going to go over just briefly the benefits of compost, the sort of volume you might need, and also the economic benefits of composting, and what is compost. And so first, I want to briefly talk about how to compost. And we were talking about Emma and Franz beautifully outlined how they walked through the process of identifying different aspects of their recipe and methodology of composting. But I want to sort of then talk about in more general terms as to how you would do that. So any farm can benefit from this idea of reducing your waste, as we said, not burning it or not setting it into the back 40, but actually recycling it or reutilizing it. This is a picture of our row crops, and at the end of every season, we would take what was left over. We were mainly growing seed to seed, so these are beans and different varieties of corn, and then we would use those as inputs into our composting program. The other benefit of composting is that it produces energy. It actually produces energy that you can harness. And some parts of the country, like in the Northeast, people actually build hoop houses over their windrows and use that heat to grow their starts or have a nursery bin, a nursery within that hoop house. It also creates methane, which in some parts of the world, and actually now starting in some parts of California, the methane is captured, and you can use that to generate electricity or use the gas to burn and use that as a source of combustion. I mentioned just briefly about the skeleton that Franz and Emma have created. It's a carbon bank. It's this humus molecule that is able to hold onto water by the very nature of it, because it's a natural element in our environment. It is beautifully designed to hold onto water and then release that water when the soil needs it. It increases the soil microbes and invertebrates that are within the soil, and the compost, by adding it into the soil, is sort of an inoculation of this ecosystem. And it's also an incredible way to be involved in the living aspects of your farm. And even as Franz and Emma were saying, they're sort of involved in this SARE grant, which has made them become involved in sort of a scientific inquiry and a deeper dive into what's happening in their farm. Just really briefly, because I know we're running out of time, there are economic benefits of composting. A lot of what is considered waste on farms, especially if you have animals on your farm, that is a lot of times thrown away or, again, moved to the back 40. Whereas you could capture that, especially those manures or your cover crops, or in this instance, the limbings of your trees, and actually use that quote unquote waste to create an enormous amount and economic benefit, because you're generating that input. And also over time, for example, Franz and Emma may be able to produce more compost than they will need in the future. And that's a medium that they can eventually sell to other growers. So really briefly, compost is this unbelievable gift that has been given to us from the natural world. It has both physical components that, as you saw in the pictures that Franz and Emma were sharing, it has a certain kind of porosity to it. It can create these wonderful air pockets and ways that will benefit your soil just by the physical nature of it. It also has a chemical component. It has a wonderful way of holding on to these micronutrients of not only nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but also other micronutrients like calcium and sulfur that just through the very process itself of composting holds on to these micronutrients. And then it also has a biological component. It is full of life and full of what one would call the soil food web. It's its own beautiful ecosystem that you would then be introducing into your farming system. The best way to, aside from working with an advisor or someone who has had experience composting, it's also good to think of compost as really a doorway into working in the generative living realm of an ecosystem. And so when one is thinking about implementing a composting program into their farm, there's really three main components that you have to think about. One is capturing the carbon to nitrogen ratio. And I'll go into quick detail about it, but I should pause here for 1 second and say that I hope no one's panicking at this moment and trying to absorb quickly what I'm saying here, because at the end of this presentation, I'll share with you a link for a booklet and videos that the U.S. Department of Agriculture helped fund for me to put together as an open source to anyone that's interested in composting. So that link will be provided at the end of this presentation. Okay, so to go back to what I was saying, there's really three things as a composter that you really need to focus on. And one is the carbon to nitrogen ratio, which is really the food for the microorganisms that are going to break down this ecosystem. You need water because that's the medium that they're living in. And of course, any living being needs air for the respiration that's going to happen, the metabolizing of these elements. This is just a real brief look at the carbon to nitrogen ratio. And instead of, as you can see on the left, it says nitrogen, and on the right, it says carbon, but sometimes people say green or brown. And sometimes that's easier in our minds to think of that. There's a ratio that you want to strive for that is not dissimilar to the ratio that we put on our dinner plates or that we put when we sit down to lunch. It's a certain amount of protein and a certain amount of carbohydrates that we need to eat every day. This is also what the microbes need. And so this is really what the ratio of 30 elements of carbon to 1 element of nitrogen is talking about. And don't worry if this is confusing. This tends to be very confusing for many people. But in the booklet and the videos, it really helps break this down and make it easier for you to understand. I'm just going to skip over this slide because I don't want to confuse people. But when we're talking about the carbon to nitrogen ratio, sometimes it's easier, and this is really how I helped Emma and Franz to think about their recipe for their windrow was to use 3 volumetric parts of greens, the carbs, and 1 volumetric part of browns. Now in the field, and that was actually a really great photograph of Franz and me standing there. While we were in the field, we decided that it would be better to change the recipe because of the quality in the field as to what the ratio would be. But in a perfect world, you would want it to be about 3 parts brown to 1 part green. And then once you have your recipe, it's pretty straightforward as far as turning the windrow once a week, adding water, doing the squeeze test to make sure there's enough enough moisture in the pile. That is what keeps the microbes doing what they need to do. And then for the initial month or 2, you need to be on a pretty regimented schedule of turning the windrow so that there's enough oxygen introduced to keep the microbes alive. But now at this point, as you can see with that last beautiful photo of their dog on top of the compost pile, the pile reaches a kind of homeostasis and it goes into a curing phase. Not that dissimilar from wine or cheese or salami. It gets to a certain point where it can do this wonderful curing and really gather itself, and you can use it then at any point in time. Really quickly here, what these arrows show are the actual times that you may turn your windrow, and this is the progression of time. I'm just briefly showing you this because there's a balance between turning and the introduction of oxygen, which actually, to a certain degree, burns off the carbon, but you also need to introduce this oxygen. So this is another reason why it's good to work with someone who has had some experience composting, because this is the dance that you're trying to do as far as creating good quality compost.
Hey, Marnie, just a quick moment. Somebody asked, what is the squeeze test? So maybe just give an image of what that actually means.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, Emma. Yeah, so and in the videos that are attached to the booklet, there's a very good demonstration of the squeeze test, but quite literally what you do is you take your hand and you put it in your compost pile and you squeeze the materials, and if there's just some drips of water, that means that you have a very good amount of water in your compost pile. That's like perfect. So if you take a handful of your material and water's just, gushing from it, then you have too much water, and that actually limits the oxygen in your pile. Or if you take a handful of it and there's no water that you can squeeze out of it, then it's too dry. I think this too is a video. This is the windrow turner on our farm, so I'm going to skip over this because we've seen a demonstration of that. How are we doing for time, by the way?
You're good. We got 15 minutes, so we'd like some time for conversation, but
Okay, wonderful. Let's see. So in your every farm is unique, and every farm will have their own recipe. And because of the different elements and different inputs that you're going to make your recipe out of, these are sort of the concepts and sort of the things that you need to fold into your recipe formation. So one is what we've covered is finding the right feedstocks that create a good carbon to nitrogen ratio. But other things that we haven't touched upon yet are the size of the particles. And Franz and Emma took great care and time to find ways to reduce the particle size specifically of the lemmings. And that tub grinder that they showed was a great find and a great use of a machinery, because what it did was it created wood chips that were of a certain size that allowed the microbes to work on this carbon source. In other words, if the wood chips had been bigger than what they had created, there would be too much surface area for the microbes to really break down this carbon source. So there's this balance between particle size of making things not too big, not too small, just sort of the right size for the recipe that you have, depending on the feedstocks. Like, so let's say you have cow manure as your source of nitrogen. You're going to want to have a particle size that can deal with that heavy, dense of a source, kind of a slurry of a source. So you might want a little bit larger particle size, which brings us to the next topic, which is porosity. Porosity is just the air spaces that you would find that you need to create in your compost size, your compost pile. So the particle size and porosity kind of work together with each other. Also, you want to really consider what the feedstocks, how they're able to hold on to the water. One of the problems that Franz and Emma were facing was the cover crop that they had, because it was such a wet winter and early spring. The cover crop grew faster and had more structure to it, and that actually made it a little drier than one would expect. If the cover crop had been not as tall and more supple, and in the sense that it had more water to it, they wouldn't have had to have added as much water that they did in the process of composting. And ultimately, all of this is to say that the recipe formation is kind of finding this nuanced balance of all these elements that need to come into play. I'll skip over that. This is just another way of looking at the temperatures. You really want initially a wonderful sort of spiking in temperature, because this spiking in temperature and the thermophilic bacteria do a kind of cleansing of the compost. They eliminate E. coli and other potentially harmful fungus and bacterium that can come into your compost pile. And then over time, you really want your compost to fall into this mesophilic range where, and in that temperature range are a whole other different community of funguses and microbes that will cure your pile and really sequester the elements into these humic molecules, into that carbon skeleton. We pretty much talked about this already, about the benefits of compost. And I just want to stress here that mature compost is what you're after. A lot of the compost that is sold on the market and is available for organic growers is not truly mature compost. It's one of my big complaints. And if you're going to generate compost yourself on your farm, it will be of much higher quality because you are able to create this very mature, lovely medium that is full of moisture. It is full of micronutrients, and it will condition and enrich your soil. You can also use it for dressing around your fruit trees. You can use it as a potting soil mix medium, like I did in the Presidio. And you can also use it as a way to inoculate and keep clean the floors of your chicken coops or your dairy barns, because it is this wonderfully balanced medium. So here is, you're welcome to contact me. My email is marneyjblair@icloud.com. But I really would stress immensely for you to go to Sierra Harvest. Their website is sierraharvest.org, and you will find there the free booklet and the videos that you can watch that will go into much greater detail of how you can compost on your farm. So the link there is sierraharvest.org/compost essentials. And maybe Evan or somebody can put this in the chat so people can.
Yeah, we can also send up a follow-up email to everyone who attended today and provide any of these links and any other resources. We've got just a couple more minutes here, and I know we have just a few questions here that came in I wanted to touch on. There's a few questions here about methane. One of them was, Marnie mentioned harvesting methane for compost piles. How does that work? The logistics seem challenging. And another person asked, how might the turning schedule affect methane generation?
Oh, that's so great. Yeah, so methane, which is carbon and 3 hydrogens attached to it, is just sort of a natural gas that can come off the windrow. It can also come off slurries that you would make from animal manures and various other things that are slowly decomposing. So how you would capture that is by having the compost in a kind of vessel of some sort. You can either have it in a methane digester, you can have it in a greenhouse of sorts, and then you would capture that gas through a tube. So it would have to be a sealed environment. And I'm sorry, there was a second part to that question.
I think someone was just asking for general clarification. How does the methane harvesting work? The logistics seems challenging, and the other one was about how does the turning schedule affect methane generation?
Oh, yes. So probably the easiest way to think about methane generation is a sort of a two-step process. And in many parts of the world, people actually do this. They have a methane digester, which is a vessel that captures the methane for a certain period of time. And then they take those feedstocks out of the digester. So the digester being this closed environment. And then they compost in windrows the material once they've captured the methane that they want. I hope that clarifies things.
Hey, Evan, I'm just wondering, we have 5 minutes, so there may be a few more questions that were written down, but this is the last moment. If anybody's out there that has something that you'd like to ask about this project and or how we got to do this project.
Yeah, and we got another one here. Are walnut husks and or shells potential material that can be incorporated into compost?
Okay, that's my favorite question, and is that if something comes from the natural world, in other words, if it's not synthetically generated, it can always be composted. Anything that is on your farm can be composted. The challenge is to create a recipe. In other words, to find a complementary nitrogen source that will help break down those inputs.
You want to jump in, Franz, at all?
Well, specifically towards the hulls and the shells, they're extremely different material, and so the green husks, you know, would break down. I mean, the simple answer is it would break down quickly, and you would need the right complement to it as well, because they contain different chemicals that need to break down in a certain way. Otherwise, they can be kind of retarding to growth, as we know. The other thing is the shells are almost like wood and almost harder than wood. And so they would take a lot longer, and how you would treat breaking those down would be entirely different. And yeah, Marnie would say more to that, but I think that's a simple answer for now. I think there was another question up there.
There's a question just about speaking a little bit more to the SARE grant, although it looks like somebody also dropped a link into that grant for folks to learn more about this opportunity.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
you want to say that? Go ahead.
Well, there's not much time left, and I would just for myself, I'd like to input that, you know, it's been a wonderful project and a wonderful process to enter into, and I've just enjoyed the opportunity that this grant offered, because all this took a bit of time and effort and energy, and being busy on the farm just trying to keep up with all the other things would have made it difficult to kind of take the steps to really get into it. And so just regarding this farmer research aspect of it, I think it's a brilliant move, whoever came up with it, because us farmers have a lot of questions and want to try a lot of things, but often it gets stuck by, well, I don't have time or money to put into that. And so I'm just extremely grateful, and also just want to share a little bit my enthusiasm that this is a wonderful world to get into, and how fun to be able to use everything that's already on your farm and enhance it. And that's an empowering, liberating, many more feelings to have as a farmer.
Yeah, and if I can just say that before 2023, we had no compost program. So you saw one image where we in this year we got very ambitious, and we did this project, and we're also doing all this experimentation that's thankfully somewhat subsidized or supported by the Healthy Soils program. That's how we could buy our turner. But just to say, before 2023, we had no compost program. The program was synthetic fertilizer, except in our organic parcels. But we weren't making compost before that.
Right, and that's what I was just going to say, is the sky's the limit for you guys. I mean, look how where you were and how you've come, and it's just the beginning of a really amazing journey, I think.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We've reached our time here, but really want to appreciate all three of you for joining us here at the California Small Farm Conference. For those of you who are tuning in, next up we've got a workshop on integrated livestock into your cropping system, as well as another one on digital marketing. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we hope to see you at another workshop. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you.